In this session, we'll be talking about how the pack bag works, what it is, when we use it, its benefits and limitations, and then we'll be doing a demonstration of getting someone inside it. A pack bag,
PAC standing for Portable Altitude Chamber,
is a small, relatively lightweight, portable device that can be used in the treatment of severe altitude illness, AMS, HAPE or HACE. Somebody can be put inside it and it creates a sealed chamber in which we can simulate increased pressure. Well, we can increase the pressure in the bag to simulate descent to lower altitudes. So we'll just go through some of the aspects of the pack bag basically and how it works. So as you can see, it's a kind of a human-sized bag. It's made of a really durable, thick plastic material that can withstand these high pressures. Often they've got instructions on them, which is super handy, and very often they're in two languages. So for example, this one in English and in Nepali. Not all pack bags look the same. There's different brands, different styles, but generally speaking, they've all got the same sort of features. So on one end, there'll be usually 3 circular areas like this that all have a different function. They clearly state on them what they are. So this is the auto release valve. So when the person is in and we're increasing the pressure, as we keep pumping, air will come out of here, which gets rid of any carbon dioxide build-up in there to make sure the person is, not getting too much carbon dioxide, and also releases some pressure to make sure the pressure doesn't exceed a safe amount. This one is obviously the inlet where we've got the pump connected to, so we're pumping air in. And then this one here is the release valve, so when we want to reduce the pressure to get the patient out of here, we can manually do that there. Then on the front side of the bag, I've obviously got the zip. The person gets in, zip it up nice and tight. And then there's usually, again, these vary from bag to bag, but there'll be some sort of clear window here so that we can see our casualty, to continuously assess them, and so that we can have some communication with them as well. There's also a pocket here. I don't know how well that's coming up, but we'll show you later when we get our casualty in the bag. So it's a pocket that you can put something in like that. So for example, an altimeter watch can go in there, so you can be measuring how you're doing on the pressure and the altimeter and the altitude, inside the bag when the person is inside. Usually they've also got instructions. They're all around about the same. It's all pretty straightforward to use, but good to keep checking. And they've usually also got a graph on there as well, which will tell you from where you're starting in your real altitude, wherever you are. It will tell you when you've pumped this up to its maximum pressure, what altitude you can simulate. So it's a pretty linear graph, and they can basically simulate descent of up to about 2,000 meters. So for example, if we were starting off at a real altitude of around 5,000 meters, we can follow it along and then read off that we can simulate by using this bag an altitude of somewhere between 3,000 and 3,500 meters. So we're decreasing in our simulated altitude of the best part of 2,000 meters, which is hugely significant. So when would we use a pack bag? In what situations would we need them? Well, obviously, as we've described, it's trying to treat people with the more severe ends of altitude illness, high altitude pulmonary edema and high altitude cerebral edema. But as we know, the descent is the gold standard, for treatment. But there are going to be some situations where we can't descend for whatever reason. For example, safety, if it's approaching nightfall or the weather's changing, or we can't get evacuation, for example, with a helicopter or another method because of safety, and we need to keep that casualty where they are, then that is when we would be using the portable hyperbaric chamber. So it's not instead of descent, but it's to either aid descent or when descent is not possible. So in terms of practicalities then of using the bag, it's not necessarily quite as simple as it seems. When somebody is inside the bag, they'll be completely sealed in and won't be able to get out until we deflate the whole thing. And as I mentioned before, it needs continuously pumping to make sure that the pressure remains static, that we want the pressure that we want it at, but also to expel the carbon dioxide. And that is relatively labour intensive, and it needs a pump every sort of few seconds or so. So you can imagine the scene if you're, somewhere high altitude in either a clinic or a tent situation, you've got somebody very sick in the bag, you need at least multiple team members to be able to rotate doing the pumping, to monitor the casualty, and obviously to be looking after yourselves as well. So this is not a one-person thing, you need a team of people to be able to help manage this casualty. Other practicalities are the fact that when somebody is in there, as I say, they're probably going to be remaining in there for a little while, so minimum really an hour up to several hours. Once they're in, so you need to think about comfort for that casualty. They need to be kept warm and insulated. The other thing, of course, is that these are pretty expensive, and we need to make sure that we're protecting the bag, so they need to be making sure really that they're on a flat surface and preferably something underneath them to protect the structure of the bag. They also, as you're about to see when they get pumped up, they're a circular cylindrical unit, so it has to be flat ground, otherwise your patient's going to be rolling away from you. In terms of patient or casualty comfort inside the bag, they need to have some layers because they can be pretty cold just lying there, and so well insulated. They also need to have just basic levels of comfort, maybe a pillow, especially if they're suffering from high altitude pulmonary edema, where it's better to have them in a propped up position, so not lying completely flat. So we need to think about that in advance, and potentially things like a bottle of water in there as well. And as I said, if they're going to be in there for a few hours potentially, then they need to make sure that they've had something to eat and been to the toilet before they get in. So it's really basic stuff, but it can make a big difference because once they're in, we want to keep them in until they're, clinically improving. There are also some limitations to this kind of bag as well, and we've talked about all the the good things and how they can manage these unwell patients, but also they're not for everyone. If somebody's got severe claustrophobia, probably not going to be too keen to get in. Then again, if they're really very unwell and sort of in extremis, then they may not be too bothered about claustrophobia at that stage, but it's just something to consider. And the most important one I think really is for casualties who have got a lowered level of consciousness. So on our sort of GCS scale or alert scale, if they're confused or agitated or they're sort of slipping into unconsciousness, we need to be very, very cautious of that, because if they became so unconscious that they were a risk to themselves in terms of their airway management, then we wouldn't be able to intervene quickly with that. It takes a few minutes to deflate the bag. So if you think that your casualty is potentially at a risk of having airway compromise, then they can't go into this bag. Other limitations are potentially for people who have suffered barotrauma or who have inner ear problems because of the differences in pressure as we pump the bag up and then release it down. That can cause issues with inner ear problems. So what we always say is when we put somebody in to make sure they're equalising their ears, but if someone's struggled with that in the past, that's potentially a limitation to this. However, again, it depends how unwell they are. You have to use clinical judgment. If somebody really is in extremis and we're doing this to save their life, then we have to balance the risk benefit of that sort of thing. The other thing I suppose to think about is evacuation planning further down the line. I often get questions about whether it's possible to evacuate somebody, for example, on a stretcher in a bag like this, and really it's not impossible, but it's not really recommended, and because of the sort of cylindrical nature of the bag, it's difficult. It potentially has risks in terms of rolling if anything were to happen and the stretcher was dropped, but also the fact that you can't easily access your patient in there, they can't get out at all, and it's more difficult to assess, and the communication is more difficult because it's quite a muffled sound in the bag, so it generally needs to be quite a quiet environment to be able to have that communication with your casualty. So generally speaking, they're not really used for sort of travelling evacuation. They're used to stabilise a patient, get them a bit better to hopefully be able to either self-extricate, get themselves out with help, or to get them at least stabilised and a bit better, ready for some other evacuation plan. These bags are available commercially, and you can buy them from anywhere between about £1,000 up to best part of £3,000. As I said before, there's various different makes and models out there. You can also usually rent them, and many sort of larger commercial expedition companies will have their own bags. They're also found at various aid posts in high altitude areas, for example in Nepal. There are several in the Khumbu region. Also many of the French alpine huts have them as well, and I've used one in one of the French huts there. What I would say is if you are renting one or buying one or getting one out of some sort of storage facility to use on your expedition, just double check that it works, double check, train yourself and train your team members in how to use it, or remind yourself, and just double check that the zips are working, and most importantly double check that the pump is working. So especially sort of these rubber structures, when they're going up and down over time, and the rubber can degrade quite easily, and it would be it would be devastating if you'd carried it all the way up there and needed it, and something as simple as the pump wasn't working. So just double check everything before you go. The same with all equipment on an expedition. Before you get in, Tom, let us know what your altitude is currently, please.
290 metres.
Okay, so 290 metres above sea level, and it'll be interesting to see what altitude we get to once you're inside the bag. So we're going to imagine that Tom here is suffering from high altitude pulmonary edema, and I'm going to get him inside the bag to help manage his symptoms. So Tom, I'm going to pop you inside here. You're going to be, for this situation, lying flat, and what I'd like you to do is take your watch in with you so we can pop it inside the bag. I would also give him a pulse oximeter to wear as well, so I can manage and observe his pulse rate and oxygen saturations whilst he's in there. I haven't done that today because obviously they're not going to change because we're actually at sea level. But I would do that. Give him a bottle of water, and of course give him any other treatment, so medication treatment first before putting him in. What I'd like you to do is get inside. I'm going to zip you up, so you won't be able to get back out until I let you out. You will be able to see me. We'll be able to see each other through the screen. What I'd like to do whilst I'm pumping up the bag is to sort of quite regularly blow out gently against a closed nose, just to equalise your ears, to prevent any issues with barotraumas to your ears. And I'm regularly just going to be checking in on you, and just give me a thumbs up if you're okay. Is that all right?
Yeah.
You won't be able to hear me totally clearly, but we should be able to still talk to each other.
Okay.
All right? If at any point you do want to come out, just maybe do some thumbs down to me. And whilst we're pumping, you might have to hold the top end up if that's all right. So I'll just do the zip up, which is quite difficult sometimes. Ooh, very difficult in fact. Okay, watch your fingers. There we go. Okay, and we'll start pumping. Okay, so I now know that the pack bag is up to the correct pressure, because not only am I boiling, but also I can hear a hissing sound coming from the auto release valve, which is indicating to me that it's letting off any excess pressure, which means we must have reached the correct pressure. As I can see, it's now actually gone down a smidge because I've stopped pumping. So we need to maintain that pumping, not only to maintain the pressure, but also, as I said, to make sure that we're getting rid of any of that excess carbon dioxide as well. And of course, checking on our casualties. So how are you doing in there, Tom?
Very good, thank you.
Yeah, you comfortable?
Yes, thank you.
Lovely. And have you got your altimeter watch there?
I do.
And what altitude is it saying?
Minus 722 metres.
Don't know if you heard that on the film, but it's minus 722 metres. Which, bearing in mind we're in the UK, definitely not underwater, is impressive. So I'm going to let the pressure out of the bag now. So Tom,
Yeah.
I'm going to let the pressure out. If you just continue to gently equalise your ears sort of every maybe 20 seconds or whenever you feel you need to. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Lovely. Okay. So again, you go to the release valve and essentially follow the instructions. So it's clockwise for close, so I'm going anti-clockwise, and I'm doing it nice and slowly, nice and gently. can start to hear a very quiet hiss. And again, to reduce that risk of the barotrauma, I'm just doing it nice and gently. We don't want to do any dramatic falls in pressure. So this may take a few minutes. You okay in there?
Yeah.
Keep equalising your ears. Coming down a bit quicker now. So obviously what we never do is unzip the zip to deflate. It has to be deflated like this. So once the bag is deflated so that it's not rigid anymore, then you can undo the zip safely. So I'm just going to undo the zip, Tom, if you just stay still for a minute. There we are, and you can get out.
Please follow, subscribe and share, and please get in touch if there's any topics that you'd like me to cover. If you want to learn mountain medicine in more detail, check out my online courses, Cold, Illness and Injury, Humans at High Altitude and Women's Health for Mountain Adventures. And for anyone who's interested in mountain medicine and their self-paced courses so you can do them at home in your own time.